Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third edition for this year of the Grow Asia Digital Learning Series. I'm Adam Lyle, co-founder of Padang & Co, an innovation catalyst based here in Singapore. Padang has been pleased to partner with Grow Asia for the last 3 years to support the design and delivery of this very popular series. DLS brings together corporate leaders, agri-tech startups, and ecosystem enablers to learn about emerging technologies and uncover opportunities for scalable, impactful digital solutions that can be implemented for and by smallholder farmers across ASEAN. In Glasgow 3 weeks ago at COP26 and last week here in Singapore for the fourth run of the Asia Pacific Rethink Agri-Food Innovation Summit, the role of agriculture and the whole food industry's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions was put under the microscope yet again, and appropriately so. The promise of a transition to more regenerative agricultural practices is gaining a lot of support as one way for ag to reduce emissions. But like most things in life, transition takes time, but also requires incentives to enable such behavior change. Hence today's edition, focusing on the role of carbon farming and other green finance options for smallholder farmers, hot on the trail of such conferences, could not be more timely. I'm particularly excited to hear from our speakers and moderator as they each present such different perspectives, yet common ambitions. It's only by connecting these dots, or the dots with the speakers, you, the audience, your ambitions, your capabilities, that we stand a chance of meeting our respective commitments for 2030. Only 8 years and 39 days away, a bit sobering. The countdown to 2030 is on, so let's get going. I'd now like to introduce Weili Wu, Lead Innovation for Grow Asia, to introduce the afternoon and our speakers. Have a great session. Over to you, Weili.
Thanks so much, Adam. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. And on behalf of the Grow Asia Secretariat here in Singapore, I would just like to welcome you to the third DLS event. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, Grow Asia is a multi-stakeholder partnership platform catalyzed by the World Economic Forum in ASEAN, and where we build action-oriented and market-led partnerships for inclusive and sustainable agricultural development in Southeast Asia. And we do this through our 6 in-country partnerships around the region, as well as regional programs run out of Singapore, such as our digital program, which has sought to bridge the gaps between startups, investors, corporates, and development actors to ensure that food systems transformation is inclusive and sustainable. I'd like to thank our major donor, the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, whose support makes our programs and events like this possible. In the vein of sustainable food systems and really post COP26, this topic couldn't be more timely. I'm really excited that today we'll be tackling the topic of carbon markets and green financing more broadly for actually the first time for the digital learning series. As you know, we hope to start really just the first of many discussions and conversations on how the ecosystem, digital and beyond, can enable farmers to have more direct access to green financing. So by way of a little bit of introduction, it's been estimated that agriculture contributes around 20 to 25% of global GHG emissions, which is very significant. In developed markets like the US and Australia, carbon markets are being deployed to incentivize farmers to employ regenerative practices that rebuild soil organic matter. Companies wanting to offset emissions can pay farmers to sequester carbon, but there's many challenges that remain, including the high cost of converting to these regenerative practices and difficulties in measuring and reporting the changing carbon content of soil. The promise of carbon farming and other types of green financing and sustainability-linked funds is potentially even more compelling for farmers in regions like ours in Southeast Asia, which face really significant climate change risks. Smallholder farmers globally are on the front lines of climate change and are less likely to have the resources to manage and adapt to it. They also stand to benefit from the additional, more diversified income streams and increasing their crops' productivity through better soil management, etc. So today we really want to start this discussion on how do we address these challenges? How are we going to provide or enable access to carbon markets and other types of green finance for smallholder farmers? What lessons can Southeast Asia learn from other more developed markets in other regions, which we're going to hear from some projects, some of our speakers today on their projects in other regions. What types of tools for monitoring, platforms, or practices have to be developed or scaled up to create a conducive, enabling an environment for farmer adoption? So we're really excited today to have our three speakers and moderator. So without further ado, let me just go through a few admin points. This is our agenda for today. We'll be hearing a brief 5-minute presentation on some very cutting-edge, recently announced projects by our three speakers. And then we will have a moderated panel discussion where you will be able to bring all your questions to the table. Please keep those in mind as we're going through the presentations. Next slide, please. Just some housekeeping. If you have any questions for the speakers, please type them into the Q&A box, not the chat box, so that our speakers can answer them after they finish their presentations. Or if anything is not able to be answered today verbally in the session, we'll link you up with the speakers as well. If you have any other any other comments can be put into the chat box. If you want to introduce yourself or make some general comments, please feel free to put that in the chat as well. We enjoy having a lively discussion that way. Next slide, please. So I'd like to take a quick just poll of the room so we can have a better idea of who's here. Please launch the poll. We just want to get a sense of where everyone is based, because we saw from the registration that we had a nice a pretty diverse list of people from not just in Singapore, but really coming from all over the world. Just give you a few more minutes, a minute or two to answer. Let's see, it's at 75%. Can inch upward a little bit more toward, okay, wonderful. So we have a fairly sizable contingent from Singapore, but also 41% of you are from, let me share the results, are from ASEAN, and we have 20% from even outside ASEAN as well. My second question, apologies for the polls are a little bit glitchy today. Next slide, please. Thank you. The second poll question is just on what type of organization you represent. It's always also interesting for us to know which sector you're from. Thank you. I see folks are responding to the poll. I'll give you maybe just 10 more seconds. The poll seems to be frozen. Is anyone else seeing that?
Oops. I have relaunched the poll. Please try it again.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, it was relaunched now. Thanks, everyone. This is a really great, again, spread of organizations. I see a quarter of us are from startups. We've got 30% from corporates, and the balance made up of NGOs, government, academia, and investors. This is really great. And I think it really speaks to the importance of this topic that we have such a diverse group of people and the necessity of bringing together all the different players in the ecosystem to discuss this important topic. Next slide, please. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Zhang, who will be Managing Director and Head of Digital Transformation at MUFG for Asia and Oceania. He has years of cross-industry experience in deep technology, banking, and government, as well as in fintech. In his current role, he primarily develops and executes MUFG Bank's transformation roadmap with measurable outcomes for the bank and its affiliates. Key areas include addressing opportunities within inclusive and sustainable banking with partners. Prior to MUFG, Zhang has held positions at the Info Communications Media Development Authority of Singapore, Citibank, and Microsoft. Over to you, Zhang. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for having me. I'm very appreciative. And as they say, no man's an island. So while MUFG is kind of talking about this topic, we are actually working in conjunction with a lot of partners across the board, as you can see. So a brief shout out to our partners also from NUS, a couple of fintechs, data acquisition partners, as also our impact analytics partner, GreenArc. So what is GreenOn? Actually, we have been looking at this problem for a while, and over the past 2-3 years, we have figured out that there's one core problem that we need to solve in order to bridge what we call what's happening on the field and what's happening, what we think and perceive is happening. So I will share a bit about what GreenOn is. But first, before I jump into the topic, I just want to focus our energies into this topic of deforestation and why our bank has looked at this in a way that's quite different from the rest. First of all, I head up the Asia Oceania Digital Transformation team for MUFG Bank. So in our backyard, we do have a lot of forest. And we found that actually the impact that we can bring by, I would say, mobilizing capital into this very important topic of mitigating deforestation is something that we can do very well. So we have chosen this topic, and we have, of course, embraced the community of smallholder partners, not alone, but with also with partners, to look at how we can mitigate deforestation. So we have spent a lot of time actually over the past 2-3 years within the bank, outside the bank, working with partners, really on the left-hand side. And when you look at this slide, right, we do have a lot of effort, not just by our bank, but by a lot of partners, corporates included. And I'm happy to see here that there are about 30% of corporates here on this event, that we spend a lot of time, inordinate amount of time on the left-hand side. And we collect a lot of data in conjunction with the work that we do to upskill them, to get certification out the ground. We enable traceability. We try to empower productivity and so on and so forth. But if you think about it, often than not, a lot of people sit on the right side, the consumers, the NGOs, government, corporates, and ourselves, the financiers, right? We actually don't have a good view of what's happening on the ground. Not because there's a lack of data, but because we have very poor availability of verified data. So that's key. And what this actually leads to, right, in our opinion, and that's where we are trying to focus our energy on in the next 12 months or 18 months, is to close the gap and try to reduce the mismatch between disclosure and what's happening on the field. So towards verifiable disclosures, we want to make it from not so accurate to basically more reflective on what's happening on the ground, and also to make sure that we have independence in terms of credentialing to verify the progress as we speak. So in a nutshell, when there's $100 million going out, we do not want to spend $1 million on 100 million projects. We want to spend $100 million on less projects, and therefore we want to be able to scale projects by closing the gap. So we have also found that the notion of verifiable disclosure, right, cannot just benefit the smallholders, the corporates, or the financiers alone. We have to benefit all of them. So we list here the qualitative and quantitative benefits that we can bring through verifiable disclosures to the whole ecosystem. I don't have a lot of time to talk about the solution, but just to give you a sensing on what the product we are looking at moving towards in the next 12 months in conjunction with the financial regulator here. So basically, when you look at the solution, right, we are trying to bring to the table a sense of assured interpretability or understanding on what's happening on the ground that can be trusted, that can be used for measuring success as projects progresses. So in a nutshell, please go to greenon.io and have a look at how the credentialing happens. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points here, right? I don't think I want to go through all of them. But the takeaway here is that you will benefit both financiers and also corporates as they look at this dashboard, and they can collectively focus on really moving the needle for ongoing projects. So the credentialing is at the project level, just to make sure that we have the understanding. We are not trying to judge the corporate. We are trying to help the projects that the corporate is working on to move towards a more green status as we move along. The last thing I want to mention is really the fact that independence and partnership with the government and the financial regulators is very key from different perspectives. First of all, we see 3 stages of collaboration with the financial regulator here called the Monetary Authority of Singapore. They have a project Greenprint that they would like to collaborate with industry and in particular with our consortium on verifiable disclosures. And we see 3 stages, first starting with voluntary and general disclosures for the benefit of branding. So if you're a corporate and you have been spending a lot of time trying to green your green projects on the field, you would benefit immediately from this by working with us to at least do a verifiable shout out, right? Kind of branding to improve your reputation. But I think more importantly, as we move towards the right, the tracking of progress as loans go out, as commitments are made, I think the impact analysis is something we can bring to the table as a stage 2. And finally, when you want to open doors, I think that's where the whole world comes together and say, hey, can we open markets for you? Can we clear regulatory compliance in the EU market? Can we help corporates find more pathways to increase sales? All these are important, right? And when we work with the regulator, we are looking at comparability, reusability, cost efficiency, and last but not least is the market acceptance and adoption. So that's my 5-minute pitch. Hopefully you can go to the website. We have made a showcase for everybody to really kind of do a point and click to understand what it actually means. The demo is there. Look at the dashboard and get a sensing of what we're trying to build in the next 12 months. Okay, with that, I'll hand it back to Wei Li.
Thanks, Shuhei. And everyone, please hang on to your questions for the Q&A later, which we'll have during the panel discussion. We're just going to quickly go through these presentations first to give everyone a sense of all of the panelists and what are their background and projects. So I'd like to introduce Jelmer van der Mortel, our next speaker, who's head of Acorn and Innovation Lead at Rabobank. Jelmer works for Rabobank to develop innovative, meaningful, and pragmatic solutions in the food and agri domain. And he's responsible for Project Acorn, which he'll be sharing more with us on. As a former strategy consultant, he has a lot of experience in bringing strategy into practice, and during his time at the World Food Programme, he also experienced farmer needs in developing countries firsthand. Over to you, Jelmer.
Yes, thank you, Wei Li. And thanks for the opportunity to share the story of Acorn. And with Acorn, we have tried to find a way also to mobilize green finance, and particularly about the way how we can support smallholder farmers in the transition to more sustainable farming. And we do this with the concept of agroforestry. As we believe that agroforestry is having benefits that go beyond climate, it's also helping restoring the land. It's providing increasing demand in food supply, but also on an individual level for a farmer, as it makes the income of a farmer more diverse, as it also can improve the soil quality. But then we checked, okay, how can we make this transition happen? And that's what we did with the voluntary carbon market. So what we do is with satellite monitoring, we measure the delta in biomass over the past year. And the delta in biomass, that's what we translate into carbon removal units. Those carbon removal units we sell to corporates, for instance, like Microsoft, and they serve as a mitigant for the gap in income in the early years and make the investment in agroforestry possible. For this development, we have developed our own proprietary framework that's certified by Plan Vivo, and a methodology that outlines how we exactly measure the delta in biomass and translate this to carbon removal units. Out of those revenues, always 80 to 90% go directly to the farmer. So that means that a farmer who has on average 1 hectare of land, and is able to sequester up to 10 tons of CO2 per hectare, can earn an additional 20% of income. With the ambition of serving 50 million farmers and sequestering 150 megatons of CO2 on an annual basis, this can lead to a private capital flow to the global south of almost 3 billion annually. So how does this work? We are always working together with local partners, intermediaries. Those can be NGOs, can be food and agri corporates, can be governments that support a large group of smallholder farmers in the transition to agroforestry. They ensure the training, the education, providing the seedlings and the saplings on a local basis. So we ensure always that it's an agroforestry system that's suited to the local needs and requirements. Centrally, we measure the delta in biomass. We have a platform where we register the farmer information, and it plots the field polygons of the farmer. And that in the end results into a very transparent way when, where, and by whom the carbon is being sequestered. And that's what we share with the corporates, so they have always a clear view what they are actually buying. And we think that's much needed in this very opaque market, what it is at the moment. That's a very short, keeping it within the 5 minutes, the concept of Acorn. If you're interested, happy to explore and or elaborate opportunities to partner, either setting up local projects within the region. We have currently projects running in Southern America, in Colombia, Peru, Nicaragua, in Africa, in Ghana, Tanzania, Zambia, Kenya, but not yet in Asia. So therefore, really happy to explore any opportunities within your region. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elmar. And from that perspective, from our financing institutions, we're going to go to a startup perspective. Now, let me introduce Dr. Olev Demidov. Next slide, please. Who's CEO of Carbon Space, a satellite-powered platform for carbon footprint tracking for companies in the food and wood industries. He has spent more than 15 years in the ICT, space, and consulting domains, and is the co-founder of 3 ICT and space startups. Over to you, Dr. Olev.
Thanks a lot, Veli, and thank you for all the panelists for the great presentation so far. I'm going to share my screen to give this presentation. Can you see it now?
Yes, looks good.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So yeah, I'm a founder of Carbon Space. So we are developing the platform for monitoring of carbon footprint remotely, based on the satellite and ground sensor data. So our mission is to provide the global independent carbon footprint transparency. So our major focus is on the land sector, where we can see the highest level of uncertainties, and we can see that current solutions do not require the cost-effective monitoring of carbon footprint. And in our platform, we have a bunch of modules. We have a carbon map that provides global carbon footprint data with 5 to 10 kilometer resolution that can be used on the level of countries, regions, and municipalities. And then for farmers, we have the carbon profile, where we provide the 30-meter resolution data, available for fields, farms, and forests for the last 20 years. And we also provide the carbon analytics module, where you can see different dashboards, you can draw baselines and trends, and you can quantify the impact from the land practices. And it can also be the basis for calculation of carbon offsets. So for the agriculture, the use case that we have is that we want to enable the shift from the on-site measurements and sampling to remote estimations. We are providing the data which gives much more frequent view on what is happening, from annual or biannual data now to monthly data. And we are targeting to reduce the cost of monitoring and verification by the order of magnitude. And with this, help to improve the profitability and liquidity for offset projects of any scale. And the secret sauce here is our technology stack. So we're combining 2 types of approaches, the top-down approach on the left-hand side and the bottom-up approach on the right-hand side. So with top-down approach, we take the data about the concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere from satellites and ground stations. And then we process this data in our proprietary atmospheric model. And then we estimate those ground emissions that should be there on the ground to cause the picture of concentrations that we see. And this is how we get this 5 to 10 kilometer resolution data. And then on the right-hand side, we have a bottom-up approach. So we take the imagery and multispectral data, we train this data using the FluxNet station data. And this is how we get the models for different regions and land use types. So that based on these machine learning models, we can estimate the data for the fields, farms, and forests just based on the satellite data. And this is one of our example of the farms in Denmark. You can see the area of approximately 100 hectares, and you can see how granular we can go with our estimations. And what is important here is that even for one field, you can have very different level of sequestrations depending on the soil type, on the local conditions. So that's why soil sampling alone is not a solution, because depending on where you take the soil samples, the results for a particular field could be quite different. So that's why it's important to have the data which is much more frequent and gives much more granular visibility on what is happening. And our belief is that farmers should not pay for the monitoring, because they should invest all their efforts into implementing the best practices. And here we are partnering with a bunch of corporates that wants to get this data to include it in their scope 3 estimations, then include into life cycle assessments and product labeling. And this is how we see the monetization way for this data to be able to be monitored and monetized. And at the same time, we're helping farmers to estimate the impact of their land practices and analyze the effectiveness of practices like no-till or cover crops. And finally, we are going to provide much more visibility and transparency for the carbon offset markets. So this is how farmers can assess the potential of their participation in the markets to understand which amount of carbon they can sequester. And at the same time, we're happy to support the estimation and verification of their performance for their offset projects. And we're having commercial projects in 7 different countries now. Happy to collaborate with partners and farmers on that front. And I think that's it for the moment, and we're happy to continue our discussion.
Thank you, Oleg.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce our moderator now, just so that we can, open up the floor to everyone's questions and to have all the panelists on board at the same time. I'd like to introduce Zhang, who leads the Sustainability and Climate Risk Practice for Deloitte Southeast Asia. She has been working with corporates to unlock value in doing business sustainably. Her current focus areas include carbon trading, clean energy transition, responsible sourcing, supply chain due diligence, impact reporting, public policy advisory, and advocacy. Yvonne has more than 15 years experience in building and trading commodity products to digitalize sustainable commodities trading and green financing. Yvonne, I'll hand it over to you first, and then invite everyone to also turn on the other panelists to turn on their cameras as well.
Alrighty, thank you, Weili. And it's a huge mouthful, right? Well, the summary is that I'm here not because I represent a big company, because I empathize with every single speaker as well as many of the attendees, having been on both sides of the equation. One side being service providers, I can see that all of us presenting here are trying to find solutions, right? And on the other side, representing companies that source natural rubber, palm, and many other types of agroforestry products from the smallholders. So meaning that I understand a lot of the issues coming out from Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, all the regions that are currently being impacted not only by climate change, but also political instability, the global crisis in manpower, and also COVID, right? So this is a very, very strong topic for us to delve into. So today I wanted to shine a light on all of the panel members, and I do welcome questions from the audience. Specifically, I have a few things to start off the conversation, and I can see on the Q&A channels, we're already getting a list of questions, right? First of all three of us here that just presented are using technology right, to engender more trust in the supply chain. And trust is about data being verifiable, data being accepted, and also data hopefully generating value, right? But really, how much is that worth? We always talk about the potential. From your perspectives, what is this whole engendering trust and also generating value for carbon? It's not new, right? We've seen from Kyoto Protocol days, it's been a battle that has been going on for more than 20 years. And this time we have more urgency because we have less than 9 years to get this right, right? So from your own perspective, what is unique about what you're trying to do into solving this age-long problem?
Yeah, I can start.
Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, I think it's really like very important time for us to start providing the markets with the solutions that are like scalable and cost effective. And yeah, from what we see now is that a huge challenge is within the monitoring approaches, because this is like how so right now you need to take the soil samples, right? You need to take like a lot of on-site measurements to make this like calculations and monitoring happen. And then you need to like audit independently. And all this takes a lot of time, a lot of costs. And for especially smallholder farmers, in most cases, these costs are prohibitive to enter this market, because just the upfront costs are too high to start with this. And our approach here is that we need to implement new monitoring approaches. We need to use the satellite data, ground sensor data that can be extrapolated to like within the regions and the land use types. And I think it's important to move forward with it on the technology side, on the application of this technology to particular like real life use cases, and then to like validate and certify these methodologies so that they can be applicable and they can be used by different players on the market. And I think this is like what we are working on very intensively, to have like a lot of different scientific validation partners, certification partners, to move this like topic forward, to have more advanced and more cost-effective approaches validated and utilized by the industry. And through that, we'll be able to reduce the cost for the farmers and allow many more farmers to enter this market, spending more like energy and money and efforts on the implementing best practices, and not trying to understand how they can validate and monitor what they're implementing.
Okay, so just to summarize, so what you've shared also from the surface overlaps with what Zhang was sharing in terms of what their platform, right, is very good at doing, which is facilitate access to market as well as enabling validation versus quite a number of the carbon certification schemes, right? So just quick question. So is carbon space solution aiming at getting validation, or is the data collected acceptable for gold standard and other types of certification schemes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. So we are looking at different certification ways. So we're working on the ISO roadmap, which is quite long, quite long term.
It's actually not the same thing. Sorry if I can just cut in, right? The ISO standards is industry baseline, but the more customized certification schemes are more proprietary, right? So that's okay. If you're actually leaning on the ISO basis, we can actually say that, we are looking at the common ground, right, between GHG protocol and many other schemes that are more customized. Can I open up the floor, right, from Yama and also Zhang? What are your perspectives? We are going to go very deep, right? And I think what has been shared via all three of your presentations has impressed the audience a lot. So let's not be shy. Let's go into depth, right? So we are seeing from the audience, questions are being asked about how often are the measurements are being made, how much does it actually cost, right? And also how does the data afford granularity to distinguish between different plots and different crops. So to what extent are these things being taken care of right now, or is it just still in the development phases of your respective platforms?
Okay, maybe I can take a stab at it. When we look at financing from the financing perspective, right, we do not look at smallholder farmers individually. We look at them as a portfolio, right? So when we start a project, we tend to try to aggregate communities, and also at a higher level, we try to companies. They can be SMEs, or they can also be large corporates. So therein lies an intervention across the value chain, which is actually very topical for companies like ours, banks especially, to work with. So when we work with partners to try and make sense of this whole situation here, right, we first of all try to ask ourselves whether it is profitable for everyone to work on it commercially to gain benefit out of it. So what are the, I mean, we talk a lot about data, right? We talk about the value of data, but we never talk about how the data can really empower the smallholders, the large corporates, and the financiers at the same time. So if you roll back to what I mentioned down before, right, we spoke about the opportunity, which if you think about the opportunity of verifiable data, right, how much is a trust worth? I think there are two perspectives, and especially for banks, we have a punitive one, which is a cost to us in terms of compliance cost, adherence to regulators' requirements, which is coming hard and fast. We are given a very strong deadline. MES has given us like next year to come up with some measurable understanding of what's happening on the ground, so that we can avoid the greenwashing bits, right? And on the top side, I think we also think about how we can seize transition financing opportunities to help our portfolio to move from a certain state to another state. So I think there are lots of opportunities when it comes to looking at this very complex topic of mitigation of deforestation and reforestation. I think there are both opportunities and a cost that we can talk about, right? And last but not least, I just want to highlight one thing, is really maybe a call out that MUFG has actually declared a carbon neutrality goal this year in May on 17th, and we have a timeline to meet that.
And just to clarify, carbon neutrality goal of an entity covers its own activities in scope 1 and 2, right? It does not actually cover the activities that it does, for example, lending and also facilitating transactions, meaning that it doesn't extend to the types of entities you engage with beyond your own procurement entities, right?
It'll be two stages for us. The first stage is by within our company. The stage 2 is by within our portfolio, which is the difficult part.
Yeah, that will be really exciting to see. I think the financing entities can really be the driving force to cause cross-sectional changes. So, relevant question from Camille Herr in the audience, right? What is the trend, and also what is the pricing difference between different types of voluntary carbon credits? For example, removal, avoidance, right? During COP26, we have seen that niche-based high-quality carbon credits has been auctioned, and also the disparaging pricing range, right, between EU credits versus, the low-grade, I suppose, even tokenized or crypto level of credits is like 40 times different, right? What are your thoughts and comments about this type of things? Value depends on quality, but quality stems from the underlying transactions and underlying jurisdictions and customer appetite, right? So why don't we unpack this? Yama, would you like to start the conversation, and then we can all have quite a robust debate about this?
Yeah, yes, definitely, Yvonne. And I think it builds up on your first point. How can we ensure transparency and data quality while making sure, to the point of Dr. Oleg, building scalability and also cost effectiveness.
Dr. Oleg and also Zhang, step in and start to, I suppose, cover your points of view on this issue of differences in quality of data versus differences in pricing and the benefit afforded on the different types of carbon credits.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this, but basically we see a fragmented market out there, right? And there's no common standards. So I think at the minimum, we need to look at comparability of standards if we cannot find common standards. So that is the reason why our bank and of course the financial regulator, we are embarking on a project to establish comparable standards across different sectors, of course. And in order to do that, I think there's a regional effort that's ongoing, which is being led by the MAS here, together with some of the regional partners. So the answer wouldn't come from us as participants. I think it comes from the people who are setting the standards, the taxonomy, the requirements for quality. I just want to call out something called joint crediting mechanism, which is something from Japan, which seeks to recognize certain carbon credits for consumption within the Japanese market. That is an example of something that's ongoing. And I think that's something that can, I think, kickstart consumption of carbon credits within the Japanese market, because the intent is that JCM is not supposed to recognize those that have lower cheap carbon credits that's being imported into the country. So I think there are these ongoing efforts that needs to be harmonized together, and someone has to bring it together, and it's probably not the panelist right here who can do such things. But I'm happy to observe that things are progressing.
Yeah, completely agree with with this point. The market is very fragmented, and it's really difficult to understand why, like, the ton of CO2 sequestered in the USA is different from one ton of CO2 sequestered in Asia. And of course, there are some differences in the way what are the co-benefits for these reductions, because it should take into account the biodiversity, maybe some like local value for the local communities and so on. And those are like additional like types of complexity that we have here. And I think from our standpoint, where we can help is to provide a very unified way, which is science-based, to have the actual measurements of like numbers of tons sequestered from every part of the world, so that they are comparable and they are the same in like any countries. And this is our goal, to provide this unified tool that you can use globally without any limitations. And then, of course, you need to potentially apply some specifics, some local specifics on the type of the ecosystems where these like carbon offsets are happening. But I think from our side, it's about the global transparency, so that you can compare at least like the physical amounts of carbon captured. And then, of course, it's a question on how to put it into regulations in different frameworks. So it's like a long way forward to make the whole system like not fragmented, but unified. And we are here on the technology side, and we'll see how it will evolve.
Okay, I understand. So one of the audience members is asking a question, right? From Cambodia, there are smallholder farmers that produce mango and banana, right? So how can they benefit from this initiative? Now, keep in mind that mango, banana are not recognized as carbon sequestering trees, typically speaking, right? And they're also a seasonal plant. So how does it work for them? We know that there is a difference between, say, rubber trees, palm, right, and also different types of shrubbery, right? That is in smallholder agroforestry industries. So how does the differentiation by product work, between the three platforms that are being showcased here?
So maybe just let me add to what I spoke earlier on. Is really when we look at benefits to the entire ecosystem, right? One of the key things that we focus a lot on is on productivity, farmer productivity, right? You can argue that financiers also need productivity, but that's not the point. The point is that how can we, through a project, as we mitigate deforestation or otherwise, we can also do financial inclusion, all sorts of projects that relate to the farmer's well-being. But at the end of the day, when we draw a line across 6 months, do we actually have an indicative improvement of the farmer's productive from where we started? And then I think that's the key thing here. So financing it's a type of resource. Knowledge, certification, there are just a set of resources, and time as well. But if we can draw the line even for mangoes, all kinds of crop, in terms of understanding what it takes, what are the practices that it takes for us to avail resources from the financiers, from the corporates, to power productivity for the farmers and the smallholder economies. And then if we can see material gain across the board over 6 months, 12 months, and even 24 months, I think we would have a way not only to break the cycle, but it's also a way to incentivize what might be a change in behavior towards certain goals. So I've spoken to a lot of farmers and people who are trying to do stuff on the ground, right? One thing that remains is what incentives can we give to farmers? Method one is actually to give money, right? I donate $5 to you. Would that work? Is that sustainable commercially? No. Method two is to empower them to fertilize their land, to know how to tend their crop, and to raise productivity. So I think loans and also the resources can come into play as long as you can align the team who is all over the world, fragmented or otherwise, to come together to scale the livelihood of farmers. And I think that's where the rubber hits the road, if we can all do that together. And that's the intent of our project, to come up with a bridge, to bridge the informational gap between the people who make the rules and have the money and the people who are in the field trying their level best to make a living. So I think that's the nub of what we're trying to do. Think of it as an informational bridge, requiring an informational bridge in between.
Okay, Yama's back, and I wanted to point the microphone back at him, right? Let's see if his audio works right now. So Shuken is sharing a more structural point of view, right? And let's not forget that we operate in a free market where rule makers dictate rules. However, the market prices are not dictated by standards, rules, or even government regulation, right? Where the free marketplace is where that's really exciting, where all of those initiatives that we're working on today can help really generate the dollars and cents, not from a donation point of view or having rules that compensate or penalize, but rather to generate marketplaces and allow access to market, right? So Yama, do you mind trying to jump back into the conversation if your audio is permitting?
Okay, no, definitely. And what we see is that current prices are opportune for smallholder farmers. So with the carbon that they come, we also see the carbon prices increasing significantly, partly driven by what's happening, for instance, in the allowances market. There we see prices going up in Europe from 30 to 70 at the moment. And that's also drove the prices in the voluntary carbon market. I think two major to the durability. So for how will the carbon being sequestered actually, that's not yet taken into consideration at the moment.
So as I was sharing, this is a point of reality check for us. We're all sitting in the 1%, meaning we're sitting in very comfortable, very much advanced economies, and yet we still have Wi-Fi problems connecting in this context. So imagine what we have to deal with on the ground with smallholders, right? The gap is immense. And that leads to the two questions the audience has raised for us. So Ashari and Athena have both raised questions pertaining to the role of government. Right? We are fighting an uphill battle if the regulators and the government commitments end up not being aligned with all the commercial efforts that we're trying to do. So all of us here are subject to government regulations. At the same time, we have a role to play to advocate for or adapt to the local regulatory policies, right? Or even provide feedback to them. So now the two questions that are here for the panel members to address. One is the indigenous people in Malaysia. They are dealing with illegal logging and deforestation. The sustainability pathway, because of the transition in governments as well as the prioritization of economic development and access to energy, other than livelihood and agroforestry conservation, is not unique to Malaysia, right? Similarly, other issues such as, how does digital technology really address questions that are more policy driven? What is the role that we want to play as gap fillers and also enablers, right? Given the technology and also financing platforms that we have, right, to actually really tackle these issues.
The question to really, so I'm trying to understand the question. Is it trying to relate to how we can help the smallholders in Malaysia?
No, it's more generic than that, right? So Malaysia is not unique. Malaysia smallholders issues is experienced by most other smallholders as well. And I think the audience for us right now, in terms of using the ESG data that pertains to highlight and also validate efforts made by smallholders has to be accepted, right, by government regulations, and also be subject to, if not benefit from, both private and public sector schemes, right? So we've addressed the private sector. Well, how about let's lean on the private sector side? What are your thoughts about, working more on the public side?
When we look at the governments, right, at least my personal observation is that they are policymakers, right? They are also, I would say, grant providers. Sometimes they have money to spend, and sometimes they do use the money, and sometimes it does distort the market a little bit, right? But having said that, maybe if you look at what the financial regulators are pushing the banks to do, and that might give you a kind of insight at how the policies in general can make sense at large. One of the things that we are being pushed today by regulators is to be able to explain climate risk, right? So, if you are used to things like Standard & Poor's, they give you a rating, and then they give you something that says AAA, and then everyone's happy with that. And then one asks you, why AAA? What is the interpretability of that? That's the first part. So it relates to the measurement. The measurement of climate risk is something we are being held to. And I believe these data points are being used by policymakers, the governments, to make decisions around how much funding, what sort of policy levers, tax incentives, blah, 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 all those things that are being made available to us. I think it's being used in that manner. So beyond that, I think also the data points that relate to scenario planning, that is something that we are being pushed to ask ourselves as banks, whether under extreme conditions where certain things don't happen well, how does it affect our portfolio? So I think policymakers are also trying to understand that. So at large, I think the tools that we deploy today cannot be Excel sheets anymore. I think the tools today will have to embrace sensing technologies, efficient deployment of funds, and in doing so, we have to respond rather quickly in 6-12 months intervals, so that policymakers can react, change their regulations, and then adapt themselves, because regulators don't really have all the answers. They work through proxies like us. So they themselves will have to then adapt the RegTech, they call it RegTech policies, right? Or SupTech, whatever they call it, in order to digitize their policy making.
I think what you said is exactly what we need to be mindful, right? How do we help the regulators understand what they need to do? And also, I think we're very optimistic to even imagine any regulator would change their policy in 6 months, because no elections are held in 6 months intervals, right? It's typically 4-year cycles. So unfortunately, I think I wanted to shine the light on the fact that we do have a very strong role to play, all of us, to direct policy, to highlight where things need to be changing. So Dr. Oleg, what are your thoughts? Because I think you've had a lot of experiences in non-Asian context as well, right? Working with different sectors. So what are your I suppose, suggestions or experience?
Yeah, I can give you an example of our experience working with like Danish, I would say, like political groups, because this political group is quite close to the community of farmers in agriculture community in Denmark. And I think the reason why so we started collaborating is that, like, in Denmark there are very ambitious climate targets. They want to reduce their carbon footprint by, I think, 60% in 10 years. And they are trying to implement different policies to make it happen. And then one of the idea was that they want to actually cover some of the agricultural lands that were originally wetlands. They want to cover them by water, so that as they think, they do not emit any more CO2 from the agricultural use. and then they can restore the original ecosystems that was there. And then we started analyzing of like what will be the impact of these activities. And it like appeared that even if like we reduce the CO2 emissions from the agriculture, this like flooding of the lands can increase methane emissions. And then it will mean that like overall the effect of this policy will be negative to the climate. And what we are doing there is we are providing the like total like analysis of the territory of the country. So we're providing the data on the level of the country, on the level of larger municipalities, then the data for different like forests, grasslands, croplands, and then we show what are the contribution of different emission sources to the total balance, and then we show where like there are some potential for improvements. So what policies can be implemented quickly to make it happen, because it's clear that the sources of emissions are different in the way on how you can influence them, and that's why it's important to understand what could be the quick wins when you implement this policy. And I think this is where technology can really help to provide a kind of like carbon registry for the whole country, showing so what is where, what are the emissions, what are the like parts of solution. And I think it can be implemented to any country in the world. And in many cases, it's about the like feasibility of what is actually happening to make the like science-driven policy making and decisions.
Okay, sounds good. We are running almost on time, and we managed to clear all of the Q&A questions. So in the last 5 minutes, right, can I perhaps start to summarize the takeaways from today's conversation with the panelists, right? So Zhang, from your perspective, I think we touched on a lot of topics today, right? What would be one or two key things that you like all participants in this event to keep in mind?
I think when we look at interventions on the ground and trying to match things that happen outside, and everything that I talk about is very technical so far, right? But what are the missing piece? One of the key missing piece I think we don't focus too much on is really how do we invest and teach smallholders rather than go forward to try to certify them. So I think that's where a bit of heart has to come into play. Even as we look at projects, they are not just hard science, right? I think there's a lot of topics we can surround the smallholder ecosystem that can bring unexpected consequences. So for example, we are working and rolling out a financial inclusion curriculum that we co-developed with a palm oil company that we are rolling out to teach and invest time so that they can be more prepared for the banking sector. You'll be very surprised how many of them don't realize and understand what is basic inflation. You'll be very surprised how much of them don't realize that their dreams can be fulfilled through banking and financial inclusion. So that's where we're looking at. And you'll be very surprised how a well-taught smallholder, not certified, can be passing our core requirements for know your customer requirements once they understand the importance of providing data to access the resources that they need from the banking sector. So I think that's my takeaway. It's not a hard science. It's a balanced approach. I think we need to look. It's also not a CSR approach. I think there's no way we can do it, provide a crutch to people. But as the science rolls out, the technology and everything else, just remember that we are dealing with people at the end of the day.
I totally applaud that. So here's the applauding. Right? We often don't talk about enough, right? Technology has to enable human lives and also behavioral change, right? So I really cannot agree with you more on putting the heart in everything we do, right? So same question to you, Dr. Oleg. What are the things that you like the audience today to take away with?
Yeah, I think you already mentioned that science and technology are the pieces that we need to like figure out, and so we need to take attention to these things, because So the more we know about what is happening, the better decisions we can make. And here, like looking at how it can be implemented, of course, it's a long process to get from innovations to the actual policy making. And that's why I think here it should be some coordinated movement from a bunch of players in the ecosystem. And it's great that we have a lot of different types of stakeholders at our session today, because this change need to be driven by large organizations. We're talking about corporates, NGOs, policymakers, and they should coordinate to provide the solutions. And I mean, the solutions that can be used by the farmers, but it's important that the farmers themselves are a big part of the solution, right? So if we are able to provide the right incentive schemes and reward them for the climate responsible actions, then this community can grow and can provide a lot of value and a lot of climate positive things. And I think it's a matter of how you build the policy based on science in the right way to enable these markets develop and onboard more and more parts of the community to this movement. Yeah, I think that's it from my side.
Thank you. So we're almost right spot on time, and it's quite a shame that Omar is handicapped by technology, which is quite ironic, right? So we're demonstrating, technology enables a lot, but we also need to make sure that we produce solutions that is able to bridge a gap without requiring that everybody has ideal access to market, ideal access to technology, and also live in a peaceful environment. We need to be more adaptive. We need to use what we can, and also we need to work together in a more multilateral way to essentially be very creative. Policies can be influenced. Market dynamics is up to us to change. And also sharing benefits requires creating value. So I hope that all of us today has managed to share some of those points of view, right? And I hope that this conversation can continue. I know that Bran and Co will arrange to share the links of recording of this panel, plus the presenters' PowerPoint presentations. And if you have follow-up conversations that you'd like to have with any one of us, you're welcome to reach out to us on LinkedIn or via Bran and Co. So with that, I'd like to close off the panel today. Thank you so much for sharing your very empathetic and scientific, as well as very direct points of view. And I will pass over to Willy to help us wrap up.
Thanks so much, Yvonne. And thank you to Zhang and Dr. Oleg and also Yelmer for this really great and robust discussion. Thanks to our audience as well for your questions, your patience with our technical issues, and your time. Just want to take a quick evaluation poll, if you could just launch it quickly, on how useful the session was. It's just for our information as well. That would be really helpful. Just echoing what Yelmer said, I think it's or rather Dr. Oleg said, actually, it's clear that we need greater collaboration between the private and public sector partners, from the startups to financial institutions and regulators. And as Yvonne was applauding, I also really like Zhang's reminder that our focus should be on empowering farmers, and that capacity building and building financial literacy really are about helping farmers to take control of their own futures. So I really look forward to continuing this discussion, perhaps deep diving on certain value chains or specific points of friction in future digital learning series events. Next slide, please. So just to let you all know that our final digital learning series event of the year will be on drones and digital integrated pest management. It's going to be a sort of collaboration between the GrowAsia's digital program as well as our program on fall armyworm control. It will be on the 9th of December from 3 to 5 p.m. Singapore time. You can register using that QR code. And that will, be a wrap for the year. We thank you for joining us today. And yes, to all the questions asking if you'll get a link to the recording will be uploaded on our website, dls.growasia.org. And we'll also be passing some of the questions to Yelmer so that he can respond in writing, and we'll put that into our next edition of our digital newsletter as well, so that all of you can receive that. So thank you once again to all the panelists and our moderator, and thank you and have a great rest of the day or evening wherever you're based, and hope to see you at our last and digital learning series event of the year in December. Thank you so much. Bye everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
Yvonne.
you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Shuhing. Thanks, Dr. Oleg.